Angela. Good to be with you today. My name is Kerrie Cotten Williams, and I am an archivist and a librarian. And I am from Atlanta, actually born in Florida, but grew up in Atlanta and started my career really as an archivist and librarian and sort of uh, an advocate for the preservation of history and culture of our community there in Atlanta at the Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American culture and history. And eventually moved to DC, where I headed the archives for the People's Archive at the DC Public Library, and now I'm at the Library of Congress. So it's been a really fulfilling journey. I'm still learning. I've been doing this work of identifying and sort of encouraging people to tell their own story, but also preserve their stories for, wow, almost 30 years, I guess. So it's been a really long time. And I enjoy every day of it and every moment. And I get to sort of connect and meet with folk like you, who have the same mission and are really encouraging community to sort of anchor themselves in their own stories.
Why is it so important now at this point in time for us to preserve the herstory of older Black lesbians?
Well, I think one, if we define what preservation is, just to sort of get an understanding of what that is, to understand why it's important, it's, really sort of one, identifying and understanding and acknowledging that your life story, whether or not that's personal, professional, both, is important to a larger narrative about a particular community or a larger sort of national narrative about communities. In this case, communities of, lesbian women, African American women. And we're talking about the South, but really it's across different states. That sort of helps complicate stories about who we are and the communities that we help to create and that we belong to. And that's really important in understanding the moment that we're in, not just socially, but also culturally and also politically. So without our narratives, there's not as much to the rich sort of complicated story of, who we are, how we, created the institutions that we belong to, how we change those institutions. So it sort of gives us blueprints from which to understand, our foundations, but it also gives us blueprints for moving forward. And that's really important now.
What would you say to a sister who's a little timid in terms of her participating in an oral herstory interview because she's not for sure how much of her story she needs to tell in this climate because it's so divisive and there seems to be a lot of backlash happening?
Well, that's real. And I think safety is most important for people, not just safety of themselves, but safety for their family and for their community. And perhaps there's a way to capture those stories and prioritize what safety means for them. It may not be going on, a YouTube channel. It may be offering your story as a person that is, there may be some anonymity to that, but the story itself is really important. There are people who, interview groups of folk and may not necessarily use all of their information to identify them, but they get at the heart of what those specific stories are. And it may be that some people need a little time to evaluate how these stories are being collected, how they are being used, and having some conversations with the persons collecting them on, how they might facilitate the transfer of their story to a larger project. It's it's about relationship building with the storyteller and the interviewer. And it's like us, like we've known each other. You and I have known each other for a long time now. I don't know how many years.
At
And
least probably almost 16 years.
a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I trust you. And there is relationship building that we were a part of for us to get to this point. And I think that's important for everyone in community. A lot of people are like, I'm not gonna tell my story to just anybody, you know. I can tell my story to you because you're also a part of my community and you value my relationship to community and you value my story and you value my impact. And I think that's maybe we should sort of start there in terms of relationship building.
Wonderful. Um, just a couple more questions. The first being, the first time I met you, you came over to the house to collect boxes of information for ZAMI. And we had all the boxes in the garage. And so you came and you gathered those. And that's when I first met you and your work. Um, what would you say to someone who is looking at an organization like ZAMI NOBLA, seeing the community archiving project we've just embarked upon, and just the host of the other work that we have done and are doing? What would you say to someone about the significance and the importance of our organization at this point in time in our landscape?
You know, I'm really sort of blown away by the work that y'all are doing because it's one, like when we first met and I was, you know, doing archival work in queer Black communities in Atlanta, and um, you all were very, and Marianne, you were very intentional about wanting to preserve that work that ZAMI NOBLA was doing, particularly in Atlanta, and then eventually, you know, across the United States. And so, one, you know, you're doing the preservation work of the narratives of Black lesbians. Two, you're doing like the really practical work of being in community and addressing some of the immediate needs, particularly of women over 50, and around housing and also around community sustainability. I think one of the things that I'm learning and also in talking to people is like, how do you um, sustain community, a supportive community where you are, which is really important to like holistic living. And ZAMI NOBLA is leading, is modeling that kind of work, which is really transformative. And then three, you're sort of, it's like almost a full circle coming back with this work with these oral histories and teaching people how to do it themselves. Like that is really impactful. And that is how people's stories get preserved. One, to say it's important and you're important, and you should have an outlet to let people know and to have some understanding of how to make that happen. And so ZAMI NOBLA is modeling that work as well. So it's I know it's a lot. It's a lot to do, but it's also um, it's the long work of it all. You know, you've been doing this work for decades and continuing to do that, and then bringing in like new activists, new people who are taking on the mission and sort of expanding it beyond its original like space and place. Does that answer your question?
Yes, beautifully so. Beautifully so. I love that. You know, this is our 10th year as ZAMI NOBLA, as incorporated.
Incorporated, yes.
Yes, in 2015. In 2011, 2013, the idea started bubbling in Marianne's head as we were doing ZAMI, but noticing that there was just really a lack of space for older Black lesbians. So we've been doing this thing incorporated for 10 years. And so this is our 10th year anniversary. We're so excited about it.
Congratulations.
Thank you. My final question is, you have been doing this work for over 3 decades. What sustains you and keeps you on the battlefield of doing the work of archiving?
Well, I think what sustains me is what got me started. When I was in graduate school, I I was in history and I was interested, in different, moments in time and struggles and movements. And what I noticed in going to the archive was that there was a gap in the history of particularly African American folks in the South around, different parts of the historical narrative. And so I thought, well, my whole intention of going to graduate school was to become like a professor. Like I wanted to do that. But then I was, doing the research and I found that I really wanted to make sure that people are represented in the archive first, and two, that they are represented differently in that they are representing themselves, that the intentionality around collecting the stories of people, that we want to study, that they are actually the ones who are having a conversation with archival institutions and communities and negotiating where their stories will be, where they will be preserved, so that more people can understand, historical events and things. So that started my work. And now I'm still interested in that. I'm also interested in getting people from different communities to come into the archive, to know that they have a right to be there, to know that that is a place for them, to know and to understand how to communicate with library professionals. Like, we're very welcoming. We want you to come into this space. We want you to use these collections that people have, placed there or we've, acquired, because we also want the interpretation of that history to be told through many different voices and many different lenses. And so that's what keeps me interested. That's what keeps me sort of motivated. I also love talking to people, and getting to know their own personal journey to the library, to the archive, and how I might assist them further. So it's these kinds of conversations that I'm having. It's reading, new histories that come out. Every day is different. The room may look the same. There are a million different stories that are told in the archive, but it's really exciting. And I would encourage people who are interested in, I know your community of listeners may already be in a profession or they may be retiring from a profession, but library work is good work. And if you are interested in sort of getting involved, I would encourage doing that on a local level or even regional or national.
Libraries are life-saving.
Absolutely.